Welcome everyone, this is Chandra Easton here. I'm going to give a talk as brief as I can on the upcoming solar eclipse, which is occurring pretty soon. My name's Chandra. I'm from starastrologyhealing.com. I'm an esoteric astrologer. I've also got a Facebook page, Soul Centered Astrology and Spiritual Healing. Been working in this field for nigh on 40 years. This talk is about the potential devastating changes that will impact the Earth in the 3-year period after the solar eclipse. It's a total solar eclipse that occurs on the 9th of March. That's, well, it's about a fortnight away now. Now, I'll just tell you a few things about eclipses. The solar eclipse is when the sun and the moon sit together, and the moon passes in front of the sun, obscuring the light of the sun, the moon representing the shadow or the personality or the ego of humanity, and the sun representing the solar impulse. So you could say that the darkness that is inherent in all of us is revealed not on the day, on the 9th of March, but over the course of the next 3 years. Now, there are many kinds of eclipses. The most significant ones are total solar eclipses. Now, total solar eclipse means that it gets our attention. All people on Earth, it will get our attention. And each eclipse throws its shadow on different parts of the world, and the shadow, or the path of Umbra as it's called, in this eclipse crosses the Pacific Ocean in a sort of a wide sweep. It starts just sort of west, starts in the Indian Ocean, just west of Indonesia, crosses Indonesia, comes fairly close to the tip of New Guinea. The point of greatest eclipse is very, very close to, what's it called, the Mariana Trench. Yeah, the Mariana Trench. I think that's one of the deepest trenches. It is the deepest trench in the world, certainly the deepest trench in the Pacific Ocean. So it's quite a dangerous place for the point of greatest eclipse to focus upon. It's roughly 10 degrees north and 149 degrees east, so it's a little bit north of the equator. Yeah. And then the shadow of the eclipse continues across the Pacific, going north of Hawaii, and there the eclipse shadow ends. So what does this mean? Well, I have the chart of the eclipse in front of me, and I'll talk about it in broad terms, in terms of what we can expect on a planetary level. First thing to notice about this chart, the eclipse is in the 19th degree of Pisces. The esoteric symbol for this degree is a master instructing his pupils. So you could say that the spiritual hierarchy of Earth are interested in getting our attention and instructing us. What are they instructing us about? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in Pisces, and the point of the past, also in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is associated with surrender, with acceptance, with choices to do with living in the material world or living in the spiritual world, and ultimately it's also associated with death, physical death, psychological death, emotional death, spiritual death. So we're all going to be instructed in the nature of compassion, that I mentioned compassion as opposed to sympathy, and renunciation and death over the next 3 years, commencing 9th of March. Now the time of the solar eclipse is just before noon, 11:54 a.m. In the Mariana Trench, and this particular chart's extremely nasty looking chart. It has a mutable grand cross where the eclipse challenges the planet Saturn, it challenges the ascendant, it's involved with a Jupiter in Virgo. In a nutshell, what this means is that all the islands of the Pacific, particularly the ones that are very close to the Mariana Trench, will receive great disruption. great oceanic disruption, tidal waves, death. There will no doubt over the 3-year period from this eclipse be major loss of life of the people who live in the Pacific Ocean, these smaller countries that border the Pacific Ocean, and most especially the islands. Mercury and Neptune sit very close together, so I wouldn't hold out much hope for early warning systems to work in terms of tsunamis. I think a lot of things will be lost in translation, especially in the smaller island nations, which will be swamped, I believe, by oceanic waves of the most enormous magnitude. Pluto's a planet associated with the ending of all kinds of things, transformation and also death. It's the esoteric ruler of all those planets in Pisces. Did I say it's Mercury, Neptune, the Moon and the Sun? That's the eclipse, Chiron and the planet Vulcan. Pisces is governed by Neptune on a worldly level, governing oceans, and by Pluto on an esoteric level to help us surrender and let go of what we've, as a species, outgrown. One might ask, why are the peoples of the islands of the Pacific targeted by this eclipse? Not a question anyone can answer. All I can say is that astronomically, that is the case. Pluto sits on the door of the 8th house. Now, the door of the 8th house is the door to other realities, the door to other realms. It's traditionally the door to birth and death. And Pluto's the planet associated with transformation of consciousness and death. So there's no doubt in my mind that there will be significant loss of life of people who live either on islands in the Pacific, in island nations, or possibly even affected countries bordering the Pacific. I'll go through a list of these possible impacts regionally further along. Other thing to notice about this chart is Saturn, which governs the, let's call it the regional response, the Oceania response to crises, is sitting in a very difficult position. So it will take quite a bit of effort to get a coordinated regional response to not one but several episodes over the next 3 years involving the Pacific Ocean. The reason why I say several is because it's a mutable total eclipse, which means that there will be a reoccurring impact and a reoccurring nature. Just when one nation thinks it's recovering from the damage of a tsunami or a volcanic eruption, then another area of the Pacific will seemingly be targeted. Okay. Of course, as a result of this, we will have an exponential increase in refugees in the South Pacific, and Australia, where I live, has been to date very niggardly, very sitting on our hands in terms of the global crisis, refusing to deal in a humanitarian way with refugees who come upon our shores. And these have been refugees who've come from other sides of the world, escaping from wars. So whether we continue to deal in this way with refugees from people closer to home, refugees from people in Fiji or the Solomons or the Vanuatu or Nauru, this will be a question for Australia. Compassion has been lacking so far. So what I'm going to do now is look very briefly at the different regions and see if I can identify the places that are at the greatest danger over the next 3 years, the ones that are at what I'd call a moderate danger, and the ones that are will be more involved in regional recovery, operations, aid and the like. So in terms of the places in greatest danger, well, astrology works by numbers, and it's the geometric angles between planets that indicate the intensity or the more moderate approach of any aspect. So the eclipse chart for the Solomon Islands, let me see if I can get these in the right order. Now, I won't start there, I'll start with I'll start with New Guinea, I think. Okay, I've cast a chart for New Guinea, and New Guinea looks, the chart looks horrific. That's the only word I can use to describe it. The eclipse, it looks like a hammer blow falling on the, and I've cast the chart for New Ireland, which are the islands off the eastern portion, northeasterly portion. I think that's right, yeah. And in this particular chart, the potential for devastation by oceanic interruption of the people who live in the islands around New Ireland, that part of New Guinea, is there'll be great loss of life, and I think it'll be very difficult to reach. There'll be a dropping of infrastructure and an inability for the government to handle the task. When I look, and I pick New Guinea as particularly devastating because the eclipse falls within 2 degrees. That's very, very intense of the government. So I think that the government response will be zilch, and the capacity for devastation will be great. Also, Pluto is in a very difficult aspect to the ascendant. I guess what I'd say about New Guinea is that it looks like whatever support comes to the aid of the people around the New Ireland region, or the islands in the New Guinea territory, it'll be too little too late. Okay, it's hard to know which are the worst charts. Let me pick on Fiji. Fiji has Uranus, the planet associated with volcanic activity. Not volcanic, sorry, earthquake activity, and it sits very high in the chart. So I'm inclined to say that there will be earthquake activity that was possibly coming from volcanoes beneath the floor of the South Pacific in and around Fiji. All I can say for the people who live in Fiji is that they ought to flee. It's a very, very dangerous chart. I think there will be repeated problems that will cause loss of life in Fiji. The chart for the Solomons, I'll cast it for Honiara. It's not quite as difficult as the Fijian chart, but it's hard to see that it's much better. The sense that I have of the Solomon Islands is that they'll be all alone in the midst of a changing ocean and topographic structure. They'll be all alone in the midst of high magnitude changes of the bed of the South Pacific coming out of the Mariana Trench, and I believe that there will be a loss of their way of life and potentially large loss of life. I've had a look at Vanuatu, and I'm picking on the island nations because it's the island nations that are most vulnerable and most at risk. Vanuatu has the same feeling of being all alone in the midst of major tectonic upheaval affecting the South Pacific. I think there will be severe local disruption and or regional breakdown of infrastructure. They will need our help. They will need Australian help. They will need help from as many places as they can get it. Let's see where else I'm going. I'm still looking at island nations. I've chosen the tiny island of Nauru because it's very political in Australia. The fact that the Australian government has chosen to send a lot of refugees, people in crisis, to the island of Nauru, and they're vulnerable. They're all alone. I think family groups will be affected. There'll be a lot of dislocation, and again the first magnitude order changes coming out of the Mariana Trench will impact all islands in Micronesia. Okay, what else am I looking at here? I have the Japanese chart here, and I've done it for a place called Kagoshima, which is in the southern island of Japan. And I believe that the southern part of Japan will be vulnerable to tsunamis, and that they will need a coordinated effort in order to save lives. I don't think that the loss of life is as dangerous or as difficult in Japan, apart from the southern island, which I think will receive impact of a tsunami. I'm just lost temporarily. I've got lots of pieces of paper here, and I seem to have lost the one for Indonesia. I might it'll turn up eventually. Okay, let's look at the Philippines. The Philippines challenge will be, the Philippines doesn't appear to be in the direct line of fire, and I say this because the eclipse is 4 degrees. Well, it's 4 degrees. The eclipse is square the 8th house cusp, which indicates loss of life, and it's 4 degrees away from that. So I think there will be loss of life in the Philippines. I think the greatest danger, the greatest worry in the Philippines is that any aid given to the Philippine people may potentially be lost in translation through corruption. They will certainly need aid. They may actually have to come to the aid of other refugees from some of the island nations. Whether they're able to do that, have a humanitarian response, I don't know about that. I'm just going to have a look for this chart on Indonesia. Okay, so the Indonesian chart has Uranus, the planet associated with earthquake activity, in the 12th house. So there's something very karmic going on about this eclipse and how it will disrupt the island nation of Indonesia. Saturn, the planet of karma, sits in the 8th house of death. Pluto is fairly elevated in the chart, but fortunately not conjunct the midheaven. So I think what I'm seeing here is that some parts of Indonesia, maybe the islands closest to the Mariana Trench, the islands, the islands in the more northerly or the more northeasterly direction, may be completely swamped, and other islands may miraculously escape. It's without a doubt there's going to be major disruption to the daily living and the daily life of Indonesian people, which will come from more than one source. It will come from repeated eruptions of an earthquake. It will come from the ocean and repeated tsunamis, and there will be most likely a collapse of infrastructure, or a huge debt, a financial burden will come to the Indonesian government. This is a very dangerous chart. Pretty well, I guess you'd say it's right up there at the top of the list in terms of how difficult. It's very hard with all of these charts to see which one's the worst. None of them are pretty. I guess I'd have to say that the impact in Japan is moderate, but the impact in the Philippines is moderate, that the island nations of Nauru and Vanuatu and the Solomons are all alone, and that they are in the moderate category. The chart for Fiji and New Guinea, and I'd have to say Indonesia, are in the high risk categories, the high risk areas, the areas most likely to take the full brunt of the changes of the bed of the Pacific Ocean coming out of the Mariana Trench from a variety. It could be volcanic activity, it could be earthquakes, it will be tsunami, it will be all three. New Guinea is at greatest risk of loss of life because of tsunami. The Indonesian risk is coming from volcanoes, earthquakes and volcanoes working together within the ring of fire, and the Fijian chart is at great risk because of tsunami. None of it's pretty. Let me continue. I'm looking now at Hawaii. Now the eclipse is sort of crosses north of the island chain of Hawaii, and I also think that they are in the path of tsunamis, and I'd have to say that I'd have to say that they are also in the high risk category. strange as it seems, because they seem to be quite a way away, and yet what would I know about how tsunamis work? There's something about it's a 2 degree, the planet Neptune that governs the Pisces stellium is within 2 degrees of the 8th house cusp, the point of death and transition. The whole Pisces stellium, apart from Mercury and Neptune, the rest of it's all sitting in the 8th house of death and transformation. I think they will probably fare a whole lot better in terms of recovery operations, and I think there'd be less loss of life. But nevertheless, the Hawaiian chain of islands is in the line of fire. Okay, I haven't really covered all of the places in the South Pacific, but I'm doing my best here. Here we have the Taiwanese chart. It's very interesting. The Taiwanese chart looks as if there will be financial ruin as a result of regional partnership infrastructure collapse. Is that right? Yeah. It's not as if they're directly in the line of fire themselves, even though I know recently Taiwan has had major earthquake activity. It looks more like it's a subsidiary impact, and I'd have to say it's more financial, I think. Pluto is still in the 8th house, which is not a good position. Mars, well, it's hard to put it. I'd still put it in the moderate. It's sort of on the edge. It's on the moderate, in the moderate group, and this is because Mars in Sagittarius is sitting conjunct the 29th degree of Scorpio. So there will be devastation that will impact the stability. It could be the tectonic stability of Taiwan. It could be that they're not supported, that they may have difficulty with their financial recovery. I'm not sure what China's role is there with aid for Taiwan, but I don't like the look of the Taiwanese chart. The Auckland chart I would also put in the moderate capacity. I've picked on Auckland because I'm concerned more about the North Island than the South Island. And Pluto, the planet of transformation and deaths, within 4 degrees, that's a moderate impact of the citizens of the North Island. I think the North Island is particularly vulnerable to oceanic changes. I think that the New Zealand government will be instrumental in providing support. I think life's going to change for people in New Zealand, whether it's because of refugees fleeing or whether it will be that people in the North Island decide that it's just not safe. Their country is not safe because of the potential threat from the Pacific Ocean. And the last chart that I've done here is the Australian chart, and I've cast it for Darwin. Darwin's not in the line of fire for the ocean waves, but we are required to support. The call for the Australian chart here is for humanitarian aid. Yeah? So we are involved in the rebuilding and in the aid and the effort and the support and the regional outreach of humanitarian support, rather than specifically. And whether we can do that, and will our government change its policy on refugees when they are coming from Nauru and Micronesia and Fiji and in New Guinea? That's the $6 million question for the Australian government. Okay, so it's not an easy time coming for the people of the South Pacific, the island people of the South Pacific. As I said, to recap, nowhere seems to be really safe. None of the charts that I looked at would I say, oh look, they're not really affected, they've got a negligible effect. There's quite a lot of those places that I mentioned are having a moderate effect, and there are a handful that are having a very major impact as a result of the changes. If you'd like to know more, I have a series of YouTubes on Earth changes. I think there's about 8 or 9 done, and there's one specifically, and these were done from solstice charts last year. There are many lenses that we can use to look at the world situation. This one's cast on the solar eclipse, but if you want to look at the solstice charts, I haven't done the whole world yet, but I've certainly done quite a lot around the South Pacific. That would go deeper into, and they get deeper into an insight and understanding of the planetary influences and the karmic influences impacting this region. Thanks for listening. This is Chandra Easton, starastrologyhealing.com.au, and of course I work with individuals. If you'd like to know what's coming up for your year ahead, get in touch. Bye for now.